The dust cloud on the horizon grew larger with each passing minute, and Owen Whitmore knew in his bones that his life was about to change forever. He stood outside the small wooden church in Taylor, Texas, adjusting his string tie for the 10th time that morning. The year was 1878, and the June heat beat down mercilessly on the dusty Main Street. Owen had never seen his bride-to-be. Their arrangement had been made through letters, carefully written correspondence over the course of 8 months. Theresa Vaughn had written to him from St. Louis, responding to an advertisement he had placed in a newspaper seeking a wife. Her letters had been thoughtful, intelligent, and kind. She had told him about her situation, that she was an orphan with no family left after her parents had died of fever, and that she worked as a seamstress to support herself. Owen, a cattle rancher struggling to maintain his land after years of drought and rustler troubles, had found himself drawn to her words, to the gentle spirit that seemed to shine through the ink on paper. Now, as the stagecoach rattled into view, his heart hammered against his ribs. He had sent her money for passage and for a wedding dress. He wanted her to feel special, to know that even though they were strangers, he valued her and the commitment they were about to make to one another. The stagecoach pulled to a stop in front of the general store, and the driver climbed down, opening the door. Owen took a step forward, his hands sweating despite the dry heat. He watched as a woman emerged and his breath caught in his throat, but not for the reason he had expected. Theresa Vaughn stepped down from the stagecoach, wearing what could only be described as rags. Her dress, if it could be called that, was torn and stained, the fabric hanging in strips in some places. Her dark hair was disheveled, falling loose around her shoulders, and dirt smudged her face and arms. She carried a small carpet bag that looked as battered as she did. But despite her appearance, despite the shock that must have shown on his face, Owen found himself looking into her eyes, and what he saw there took his breath away. They were green, the color of new grass after a spring rain, and they held a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and desperate hope. She stood there, trembling slightly, and he could see tears beginning to form in those remarkable eyes. Her lips parted as if to speak, to explain, but no words came out. The other townspeople who had gathered to witness the arrival of Owen's mail-order bride began to whisper among themselves, and Owen could feel their judgment, their curiosity. He walked toward her, closing the distance between them in a few long strides. Up close, he could see that beneath the grime and the torn clothing, she was lovely. Her features were delicate, her skin fair where it was not covered in dust, and there was a strength in the set of her jaw that spoke of resilience and courage. "Miss Vaughn?" he asked gently, removing his hat. She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek, leaving a clean track through the dust. "Mr. Whitmore, I am so sorry. I know I must look terrible. I know this is not what you expected, and I would understand if you wanted to send me back. The journey, it was not what I had planned. There were complications, and I lost everything, and I tried to clean up before arriving, but the stage had no water left, and I just—" Her voice broke, and Owen did something that surprised even himself. He reached out and took her hand, holding it gently in his own calloused palm. "Miss Vaughn," he said, his voice carrying clearly so that the gathered crowd could hear, "you are still beautiful to me." The whispers stopped. Theresa looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief and something that might have been gratitude. "You do not have to say that," she whispered. "I know how I must look." "I am saying it because it is true," Owen replied firmly. He turned to face the crowd, still holding her hand. "This is my bride, Theresa Vaughn, and I will thank you all to show her the respect she deserves." Reverend Patterson, an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor, stepped forward from where he had been waiting by the church. "Shall we proceed with the ceremony?" he asked. Owen looked down at Theresa. "If you are willing, Miss Vaughn. But if you need time to rest, to clean up, we can wait. I sent you money for passage and address, and clearly something has gone wrong. I would like to hear what happened, but more than that, I want you to feel comfortable." Theresa took a shaky breath, and Owen watched as she seemed to gather herself, pulling strength from some deep well within. "I would like to marry you today, Mr. Whitmore, if you are still willing to have me. But I owe you an explanation first." Owen nodded and led her to the shade of the general store's awning, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. "Tell me what happened," he said gently. She set down her carpetbag and looked up at him, her hands twisting together nervously. "The money you sent, it was generous and kind. I used most of it to purchase passage on the stage and to buy fabric for a dress. I spent weeks making it, Mr. Whitmore. It was not grand, but it was clean and new, and I was proud of it. I packed it carefully along with my other belongings, everything I owned in the world. 2 days into the journey, we were stopped by bandits. Owen felt anger kindle in his chest, but he kept his expression calm, not wanting to frighten her. They took everything," Theresa continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "The money I had left, my bags, the dress I had made. They took it all. One of them grabbed my bag right out of my hands. I tried to hold on, but he struck me." She touched her arm, and Owen noticed for the first time the bruise that darkened her skin there. "They left me with only the clothes on my back and this carpet bag, which had fallen under the seat. It contains only a few personal items, nothing of value. A tintype of my parents, some letters, a small Bible." After the robbery, the stagecoach continued on, but there was no water to spare for washing, no extra clothing. We pushed through as quickly as we could, stopping only when absolutely necessary. I know I should have sent word ahead, should have tried to explain, but I had no money for a telegram, and I feared that if I did not come now, I would lose my courage entirely. I am so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I have nothing to offer you but myself, and as you can see, I am not much to look at right now." Owen felt a surge of emotion so strong it surprised him. Here was a woman who had lost everything, who had been robbed and struck, who had traveled for days without proper care, and yet she stood before him apologizing for her appearance, still willing to honor their agreement. He had spent years building his ranch, fighting against every setback that nature and man could throw at him, and he recognized that same stubborn courage in her. "Miss Vaughn," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you have more to offer than you know. The fact that you came here at all, after what you have been through, tells me everything I need to know about your character. Now, if you are willing, I would still like to marry you today. We can do it just as you are, or I can ask the Reverend to wait while we see about getting you cleaned up. The choice is yours." Theresa looked at him for a long moment, searching his face as if trying to determine if he was sincere. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she gave him a small, tremulous smile. "I would like to clean up if possible. I do not want to shame you by standing beside you looking like this." "You could never shame me," Owen said firmly. He turned and called out to a woman in the crowd, someone he knew to be kind-hearted despite the gossipy nature of the town. "Mrs. Henderson, would you be willing to help Miss Vaughn get cleaned up? She has had a difficult journey." Martha Henderson, a plump woman in her 50s with rosy cheeks and a no-nonsense manner, stepped forward. "Of course, Owen. Come along, dear. We will get you sorted out." Owen watched as Martha led Theresa away toward the boarding house, where he knew Martha kept a room for when she visited her sister who ran the establishment. He turned to find several of the men from town approaching him, their expressions curious. "You are really going through with it?" asked Samuel Grant, who owned the saloon. After she showed up like that, I am, Owen said firmly. And I would appreciate it if the town could show her some kindness. She was robbed on the journey here. She lost everything. Convenient story, muttered someone in the back of the small crowd. Owen spun around, his eyes flashing with anger. Are you calling my bride a liar? Because if you are, we can settle that right now. The man, a drifter who sometimes worked at the livery stable, backed down immediately. No offense meant Whitmore, just seems strange is all. What seems strange to me, said Reverend Patterson, his voice cutting through the tension, is that a man who has been nothing but upstanding in this community would be questioned when he chooses to show Christian charity and honor to a woman who has clearly suffered misfortune. Owen, you are a good man, and I will be proud to perform your wedding ceremony. The crowd began to disperse, some people heading into the general store, others wandering back to their daily business. Owen stood in the street for a moment, trying to calm his racing heart. He had not expected to feel so protective of a woman he had just met, but something about Theresa's courage and vulnerability had struck a chord deep within him. An hour later, Martha Henderson emerged from the boarding house with Theresa at her side, and Owen felt his breath catch for the second time that day. Martha had worked a minor miracle. Theresa's hair had been washed and pinned up in a simple but elegant style, with a few dark curls framing her face. The dirt and grime were gone, revealing the true beauty of her features. She wore a simple blue dress that Martha must have provided, one that fit reasonably well, though it was perhaps a bit loose in places. The color brought out the green of her eyes, and though the dress was not a wedding gown, Theresa looked lovely. She walked toward him slowly, her eyes downcast as if still unsure of her reception. When she reached him, she looked up through her lashes and said softly, "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Whitmore, and please thank Mrs. Henderson for me as well. I am deeply in her debt." "Call me Owen," he said, offering her his arm, "and you are in no one's debt. Are you ready?" She placed her hand on his arm, and he could feel it trembling slightly. "I am ready, Owen." They walked together toward the church, and the small crowd that had gathered earlier reassembled, along with a few additional curious onlookers. Inside the church, the air was cooler, and Owen led Theresa to the front where Reverend Patterson waited. The ceremony was simple and brief. Owen had no family to stand with him, his parents having died years earlier, and Theresa had already told him in her letters that she had no one. Martha Henderson and her sister Sarah stood as witnesses, and when Owen repeated the vows that would bind him to this woman he barely knew, he found that he meant every word. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Owen looked down at Theresa, at his wife, and saw tears streaming down her face. But these were different from the tears of distress she had shed earlier. These were tears of relief and joy and hope. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly, not wanting to presume even though they were now legally wed. She nodded, and he leaned down, pressing his lips gently to hers. The kiss was chaste and brief, but it sent a warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat. Outside the church, a few people offered their congratulations, though Owen could still sense some skepticism and curiosity in their manner. He did not care. He had a wife now, and he would take her home to his ranch and begin building a life together. He had brought his wagon into town that morning, and he helped Theresa up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. Martha Henderson approached with a small basket. "Just a few things for your larder," she said, handing it up to Theresa. "And that dress is yours to keep, dear. Welcome to Taylor." Theresa's eyes filled with tears again. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. Your kindness means more than I can say." As Owen drove the wagon out of town, heading west toward his ranch, Theresa sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap. The land stretched out around them, vast and brown and dotted with scrub brush and the occasional mesquite tree. In the distance, Owen could see some of his cattle grazing, small dark shapes against the pale earth. "It is beautiful," Theresa said softly, surprising him. He looked at her, then at the landscape that he had always considered harsh and unforgiving. "You think so?" she nodded. "It has a wildness to it, but also a strength. I think I could grow to love it here." Something in Owen's chest tightened at her words. "I hope you do," he said. "I should tell you about the ranch, so you know what to expect. It is not much. I have about 500 acres, which sounds like a lot, but much of it is rough land, good for grazing but not for much else. I run cattle, about 200 head right now, though I am trying to build up the herd. I have a small house, just 3 rooms. I built it myself when I first claimed the land 5 years ago. It is sturdy and it keeps out the weather, but it is not fancy." "It sounds perfect," Theresa said, and Owen hoped she meant it. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, and then Theresa spoke again. "May I ask you something, Owen?" "Of course." "Why did you place that advertisement? Why seek a bride through the mail instead of courting someone here in town?" Owen considered his answer carefully. "There are not many unmarried women in Taylor," he said. "And those that are here, well, we have known each other since childhood. There was never a spark with any of them. Also, ranching is hard work. It takes all my time and energy. I do not have the luxury of long courtships and social events. I am not a young man anymore. I am 32 years old and I want a family, a partner to share this life with. Your letters, they showed me a woman of intelligence and kindness, someone who understood hard work and was not afraid of it. That was what I was looking for." Theresa was quiet for a moment and then she said, "I am 23 years old. I have been supporting myself since I was 17 when my parents died. I worked as a seamstress, but the pay was poor, and I barely made enough to keep a roof over my head. I knew I wanted more from life than to slowly starve in a cramped room above a shop, sewing other women's dresses and never having anything fine of my own. When I saw your advertisement, I thought it might be a chance for something better, a real home and perhaps, eventually, a family. I will not pretend that I married you for love, because we do not know each other well enough for that yet. But I married you with the hope that love could grow between us, and I promise you that I will work hard to be a good wife." Owen reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "That is all I can ask for," he said. "And I make you the same promise. I will work to be a good husband." The ranch came into view as they crested a low hill, and Owen felt the familiar mixture of pride and worry that always accompanied his homecoming. The house was small, as he had said, built of rough-hewn wood with a stone chimney at one end. There was a barn, slightly larger than the house, and a corral where his 2 horses stood in the shade. A windmill creaked in the breeze, pumping water into a trough. Owen helped Theresa down from the wagon and led her toward the house. "It is not much," he said again, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the humble dwelling, but Theresa looked around with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "It is ours," she said simply. "That makes it wonderful." He opened the door and gestured for her to enter. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for their eyes to adjust. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove in one corner, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a pair of worn armchairs near the fireplace. A door led to the bedroom, and another to what Owen used as a storage room. "I cleaned as best I could before I left this morning," Owen said, noticing with embarrassment the dust that had already settled on the table. "I am not much of a housekeeper, I am afraid." Theresa walked around the room, running her hand over the back of one of the chairs. "It just needs a woman's touch," she said. "May I see the rest?" He showed her the bedroom, which contained only a bed with a simple wooden frame, a dresser, and a trunk for storing clothes. He had put fresh linens on the bed that morning, one of the few things he had that were in decent condition. The storage room was filled with supplies, tools, and various items he had accumulated over the years. "There is a well just outside," Owen said, "and an outhouse about 50 yards behind the house. I know it is not as comfortable as you might have had in St. Louis," but Theresa turned to face him, cutting off his apology. "Owen, please stop apologizing. This is more than I have had in years. In St. Louis, I had a single room that I shared with 2 other girls. We had to walk half a block to get water from a pump, and the privy was shared by the entire building. All of this, is luxury compared to that." Owen felt relief wash over him. He had been so worried about disappointing her, about her taking one look at his modest home and regretting her decision to come west. "Are you hungry?" he asked. "I am not much of a cook, but I can make something." "Let me," Theresa said. "I would like to start learning my way around the kitchen." They worked together to prepare a simple meal of bacon, beans, and cornbread. Owen found himself enjoying the domestic scene, the simple act of moving around the kitchen with another person, of having someone to talk to. Theresa asked him questions about the ranch, about his daily routine, about the cattle and the land, and he found himself opening up in a way he had not done with anyone in years. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they sat together at the table, eating their modest meal. Theresa looked tired, deep circles under her eyes testament to her difficult journey, but she smiled at him across the table, and Owen felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "You should rest," he said gently. "You have had a long journey and a trying day." She nodded, but he saw anxiety flicker in her eyes. "Owen, about tonight. I know that as your wife I have certain obligations, but I wonder if we might wait just a little while. I am so tired and I would like us to know each other better before we—" She trailed off, her cheeks flushing pink. Owen stood and walked around the table, kneeling beside her chair so that he was at her eye level. "Theresa, I will never force you to do anything you are not ready for. We are married, yes, but we are also strangers. I want our marriage to be a partnership built on trust and affection, not obligation. When you are ready, you will let me know. Until then, I am content to simply get to know you." The relief on her face was palpable. "Thank you," she whispered. "I do not deserve such kindness." "Yes, you do," Owen said firmly. "Now you take the bedroom. I will sleep out here on the floor. I have done it many times before, and I will be comfortable enough." "I cannot put you out of your own bed," Theresa protested. "You can and you will," Owen said with a smile. "My mother, rest her soul, taught me how to treat a lady, and I will not have my wife sleeping on the floor on her first night in her new home." Theresa looked like she might argue further, but exhaustion won out. She stood, wavering slightly on her feet, and Owen steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "The bedroom is yours," he said. "Sleep well, Theresa." She paused at the bedroom door, looking back at him. "Good night, Owen, and thank you for everything. For accepting me as I was today, for treating me with such respect and kindness. I will not forget it." After she had closed the door, Owen stood in the main room, listening to the small sounds of her preparing for bed. He pulled out some blankets from a chest and made himself a pallet on the floor near the fireplace. It was not cold enough to need a fire, but he liked sleeping there, where he could see the stars through the window. As he lay down, he thought about the events of the day. This morning, he had been a bachelor, alone on his ranch with nothing but cattle and hard work for company. Now, he was a married man with a beautiful, courageous wife sleeping in his bedroom. Life had a strange way of changing in an instant. Over the next few weeks, Owen and Theresa settled into a routine. She took over the household tasks, cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that impressed him. She also showed an interest in the ranch work, often coming out to watch him work with the cattle or mend fences. She asked questions, genuine questions that showed she wanted to understand his work, and he found himself teaching her about ranching, about reading the weather and the land, about the behavior of cattle and horses. Theresa had a natural way with animals. Owen noticed it first with the chickens she insisted on getting from a neighbor. She spoke to them softly and moved slowly among them, and they responded to her gentle handling. Then he saw it with the horses. His mare, usually skittish with strangers, allowed Theresa to approach and stroke her nose without any of the head tossing and prancing she usually displayed. "You have a gift," Owen told her one morning as he watched her feed sugar to the mare from her flat palm. Theresa looked up at him, pleased by the compliment. "My father had a horse when I was young, before we moved to the city. He taught me how to approach them, how to let them know you are not a threat. I had forgotten how much I enjoyed being around animals." As the days passed, Owen found himself increasingly drawn to his wife. It was not just her beauty, though she was certainly lovely. It was the way she hummed while she worked, the way she laughed at his jokes even when they were not particularly funny, the way she looked at the sunset each evening with wonder, as if she was seeing it for the first time. She brought life and warmth to his home in a way he had not realized was missing. One evening, about 3 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Theresa had made a stew for dinner, rich and flavorful, and Owen was feeling content and full. "Owen," Theresa said softly, "I want to thank you." He turned to look at her, surprised. "For what?" "For giving me time, for not pushing me, for treating me like a person instead of property." Many men would not have been so patient. Owen reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You are my wife, Theresa, but you are also your own person. I want you to be happy here with me. I want you to choose to be with me, not feel obligated." She was quiet for a moment, and then she squeezed his hand. "I think I am ready, Owen, ready for our marriage to be a real one in every way. I know you better now, and I care for you. I think, perhaps, I am falling in love with you." Owen's heart swelled with emotion. He turned to face her fully, reaching up to cup her cheek with his free hand. "I know I am falling in love with you," he said. "I think I started falling that first day when you stepped off that stagecoach and looked at me with such fear and hope in your eyes. You were so brave, Theresa. You are still so brave." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not. She tilted her face up to meet his, and when their lips met, it was different from their brief wedding kiss. This kiss was deeper, filled with genuine affection and desire. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing heavily. "Come to bed with me," Theresa whispered. "As my husband." Owen stood and helped her to her feet, and they went together into the bedroom. What happened there was tender and gentle, Owen taking his time to make sure Theresa felt safe and cherished. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Theresa's head resting on his chest, Owen felt a completeness he had never experienced before. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. The summer passed into fall, and their love deepened. They worked together to improve the ranch, Theresa proving to be a valuable partner. She helped with branding the calves, keeping the tally book while Owen worked the iron. She learned to ride well enough to help move cattle from one pasture to another. She started a garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil, and she canned and preserved food for the winter. In October, Theresa announced that she was pregnant. Owen swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. A baby. They were going to have a baby. The thought filled him with joy and terror in equal measure. He would be a father. He prayed he would be a good one. The winter was mild that year, and Theresa's pregnancy progressed well. She remained active, though Owen fussed over her constantly, worried that she was doing too much. She would laugh at his concern but secretly seemed pleased by his attention. One evening in late February, as they sat by the fire, Theresa making tiny clothes for the baby and Owen mending a bridle, there was a knock at the door. Owen stood, his hand instinctively going to the rifle he kept near the door. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. He opened the door cautiously and found Samuel Grant from the saloon standing there, his face grave. "Owen, sorry to bother you at this hour, but I thought you should know. That gang that has been causing trouble over in the next county, they have been spotted heading this way." Owen felt his stomach clench with worry. The gang Samuel was referring to was led by a man named Jack Reeves, a vicious outlaw known for robbing and terrorizing isolated homesteads. "How many of them?" Owen asked. "Reports say 5 or 6. They hit the Morrison place 2 days ago, took everything they had and burned the barn. Morrison and his family barely escaped with their lives." Owen glanced back at Theresa, who had stood up, one hand protectively on her swollen belly. She was 7 months pregnant now, and the thought of that gang anywhere near her made his blood run cold. "What is the plan?" he asked Samuel. "Sheriff is trying to organize a posse, but there are not many men willing to leave their own families unprotected. I am going back to town to stay at the saloon, protect my interests there. I just wanted to warn you, being out here so isolated and all." After Samuel left, Owen barred the door and checked the windows, making sure they were all secured. He loaded his rifle and his pistol, and he pulled out the shotgun he kept wrapped in canvas under the bed. Theresa watched him with worried eyes. "What should we do?" she asked. "We stay alert," Owen said. "If they come here, we will be ready, but we are not going to live in fear. This is our home, and I will defend it and you with my life if necessary." That night, Owen barely slept. He kept his rifle close, and every sound from outside made him tense. But the night passed without incident, and the next day was quiet. Owen went about his work, but he kept his gun within reach at all times. 3 days after Samuel's warning, Owen was out checking on the cattle in the north pasture when he saw the dust cloud. Riders, moving fast, heading toward his ranch. His heart began to pound. He turned his horse and raced back toward the house, praying he would get there in time. He came over the rise and saw 6 men on horseback in his yard. Theresa was on the porch, holding his shotgun, her face pale but determined. The men were laughing at her, clearly not considering her a threat. "Well, look at that, boys," one of them called out. "The little lady thinks she's going to shoot us." Owen drew his rifle from its scabbard and fired a shot into the air. The men spun around, hands going to their guns. Owen rode forward, his rifle now aimed directly at the man who had spoken. "Get off my land," he said, his voice hard and cold. The man, who Owen assumed was Jack Reeves based on the descriptions he had heard, grinned. He was tall and lean with a scar running down one cheek. "Now, that is not very friendly. We are just looking for a little hospitality. Maybe some food, some water, maybe whatever money you have got hidden away." "You will get nothing from me but a bullet if you do not leave now," Owen said. He was aware that he was outnumbered, but he also knew that showing any fear would be the end of him and Theresa both. Reeves looked at him for a long moment, assessing. Owen saw the calculation in his eyes, weighing whether it was worth the risk to fight. Finally, Reeves smiled, a cold expression that did not reach his eyes. "Maybe we will come back another time," he said. "When you are not home and your pretty wife is all alone." Rage flared in Owen's chest, but he kept his rifle steady. "You come near my wife and I will hunt you down myself," he said quietly. "That is a promise." Something in Owen's tone must have convinced Reeves that he meant it, because the outlaw's smile faded. He gestured to his men, and they began to turn their horses. "Let us go, boys. There are richer pickings elsewhere." Owen kept his rifle trained on them until they were out of sight, and then he dismounted and ran to the porch. Theresa collapsed into his arms, the shotgun clattering to the wooden planks. She was shaking, and Owen held her tightly, murmuring reassurances. "I was so scared," she whispered. "When I saw them riding up, I thought they were going to hurt the baby, hurt you. You were so brave," Owen said, pulling back to look at her. "Facing them down like that. You probably saved our lives by letting them know we would not be easy prey." They went inside, and Owen barred the door. He sent word to the sheriff through a neighbor boy who passed by later that day. And the sheriff and a small posse tracked the Reeves gang for a week, before finally catching up with them and arresting them after a brief shootout. 2 of the gang members were killed, and the rest, including Jack Reeves, were taken to jail to await trial. After the danger had passed, life returned to normal, though Owen found himself even more protective of Theresa than before. He hated leaving her alone at the ranch, but work had to be done. She assured him repeatedly that she was fine, that she could handle herself, and he believed her. She had proven her courage and strength time and again. In April, on a warm afternoon when the wildflowers were blooming across the prairie, Theresa went into labor. Owen rode to town as fast as his horse could carry him, fetching Martha Henderson, who had experience as a midwife. Martha came immediately, bringing her sister Sarah with her. Owen was banished from the bedroom, left to pace anxiously in the main room while Martha and Sarah tended to Theresa. He could hear her cries of pain, and each one felt like a knife in his heart. He wanted to be with her, to hold her hand, but Martha had been firm that the birthing room was no place for a man. Hours passed, and the sun set, and still the labor continued. Owen prayed more earnestly than he ever had in his life, begging God to keep Theresa and the baby safe. He could not lose her. She had become the center of his world, the reason he worked so hard, the reason he got up each morning. The thought of a life without her was unbearable. Finally, just after midnight, he heard a new sound, the thin wail of a newborn. His heart leaped and he stood frozen, waiting. A moment later, Martha opened the door, her face tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Owen rushed past her into the bedroom. Theresa lay in the bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face pale with exhaustion, but she was smiling. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the tiniest person Owen had ever seen. His son. He approached slowly, as if in a dream. Theresa looked up at him, her eyes shining with tears. "Meet your son," she said softly. Owen sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect fingers that gripped at the blanket. His eyes were closed and his little mouth worked as if searching for milk. Owen reached out a finger and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Owen whispered, his own eyes filling with tears. "You are amazing, Theresa. You did this. You brought our son into the world." "What should we name him?" Theresa asked. They had discussed names before, but now that the baby was here actually looking at him, those previous discussions seemed inadequate. Owen thought for a moment. "What about Daniel, after my father, Daniel Whitmore?" Theresa smiled. "Daniel Whitmore. I love it. Hello, little Daniel." The baby made a small sound, and Theresa adjusted her position to nurse him. Owen watched in awe as his son latched on and began to feed. Martha and Sarah quietly gathered their things and left. promising to return the next day to check on mother and baby. That night, Owen lay awake in bed beside Theresa, with little Daniel sleeping in a cradle Owen had built weeks ago. He listened to his son's soft breathing, to Theresa's even breaths beside him, and he felt a contentment so deep it brought fresh tears to his eyes. He had a family, a real family. After years of loneliness and hard work, he had been blessed beyond measure. The months that followed were challenging but joyful. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong, and he grew quickly. Theresa took to motherhood with the same competence and grace she brought to everything else. Owen found himself falling even more deeply in love with her as he watched her with their son, singing to him, caring for him with such tender devotion. The ranch prospered. Owen's cattle herd grew, and he was able to hire a young man named Tom to help with some of the heavier work, freeing up more of his time to spend with his family. Theresa expanded her garden, and she began to sell her excess produce and eggs in town, bringing in a little extra money that she saved carefully. When Daniel was 6 months old, Theresa surprised Owen by announcing that she wanted to learn to rope. "I want to be a full partner in this ranch," she said. "Not just the cook and the gardener, but someone who can really help with the cattle work." Owen was initially hesitant, worried about her getting hurt, but he recognized the determination in her eyes. It was the same determination that had brought her across half the country to marry a stranger, the same determination that had faced down outlaws. So he taught her, and she proved to be a quick study. Within a few months, she could rope a calf as well as any cowhand Owen had ever worked with. They worked together, side by side, building their ranch and their life. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, Owen holding Daniel while Theresa rested her head on his shoulder, and they would watch the sun set over their land. These were the moments Owen treasured most, these quiet times with his family, feeling the weight of his son in his arms and the warmth of his wife beside him. 2 years after Daniel was born, Theresa gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Margaret, after Theresa's mother. The birth was easier this time, and Margaret proved to be just as healthy and strong as her brother. Daniel, now a rambunctious toddler, was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her. The ranch continued to grow, and with it, their prosperity. They were able to build an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the kitchen. Theresa bought fabric and made curtains for the windows, and she acquired a few pieces of good furniture from the general store. The house began to feel like a real home, warm and lived in and full of love. Owen often thought back to that day when Theresa had stepped off the stagecoach in her ragged dress, looking so scared and vulnerable. He thanked God regularly for the impulse that had made him step forward, that had made him see past her appearance to the incredible woman beneath. She had transformed his life in ways he could never have imagined. She was not just his wife, not just the mother of his children. She was his partner, his best friend, his love. One evening, when Daniel was 4 and Margaret was 2, the family sat together at the dinner table. Daniel was chattering excitedly about a calf he had helped his father feed that day, and Margaret was banging her spoon on the table, making everyone laugh. Theresa looked across at Owen, and he saw such happiness in her eyes that it took his breath away. After the children were in bed, Owen and Theresa sat together on the porch as they did most evenings. The stars were brilliant overhead, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. "You ever regret it?" Owen asked suddenly. "Coming here, marrying me, it has not been an easy life." Theresa turned to him, surprised. "Regret it? Owen, how could you even ask that? This is everything I ever dreamed of and more. I have a home, a family, a husband who loves me. I have purpose and meaning in my life." That first day when I stepped off that stagecoach and you looked at me, I thought my life was over. I thought you would send me away. But you did not. You saw me, really saw me, and you accepted me as I was. You have given me everything, Owen. How could I possibly regret any of it? Owen pulled her close, kissing her temple. I am the one who was given everything, he said. You came into my life and filled all the empty spaces I did not even know were there. I love you, Theresa, more than I can ever put into words. I love you too, she whispered. Always. Years passed, and their family continued to grow. Theresa gave birth to 2 more children, another son they named Thomas and a daughter they named Catherine. The ranch flourished, and Owen became known throughout the region as an honest, hard-working rancher with a gift for raising quality cattle. Theresa became a respected member of the community, known for her kindness and her willingness to help neighbors in need. Daniel grew into a strong, capable young man who shared his father's love of ranching. Margaret inherited her mother's way with animals and her fierce independence. Thomas was the quiet one, always with his nose in a book, and Owen encouraged his education, proud to have a son who might become a teacher or a lawyer. Catherine was the baby, spoiled a bit by her older siblings but growing into a sweet, loving child. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Owen arranged for Tom, who now had his own small ranch nearby, to watch the cattle and the younger children. He and Theresa rode into Taylor, where they had a nice dinner at the hotel restaurant and stayed overnight in one of the rooms upstairs. It was a luxury they rarely allowed themselves, and Theresa was thrilled. As they lay together in the hotel bed that night, the sounds of the town muted beyond the window, Owen looked at his wife. She was 43 now, and the years had left their mark. There were lines around her eyes and mouth, and her dark hair was threaded with silver. But to Owen, she was more beautiful than ever. She was the woman who had stood beside him through drought and disease, through the birth of 4 children and the countless challenges of frontier life. She was the woman he had chosen and who had chosen him, and he loved her more with each passing year. "What are you thinking about?" Theresa asked, noticing his gaze. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Owen said. "I am thinking about that day 20 years ago when you arrived wearing those ragged clothes, and how I almost could not believe it when I said you were still beautiful to me, and I meant it. I had no idea then how true those words would prove to be. You are still beautiful to me, Theresa. You always will be." Tears sparkled in Theresa's eyes. "You are still the kind, honorable man who saw past my appearance to who I really was," she said. "You gave me a chance when most men would not have. You gave me a life, a family, a home. You gave me love. I will never forget that first day, how terrified I was, and how you took my hand and made me feel safe. You have made me feel safe every day since." They kissed, a kiss that still held passion but was also filled with the deep comfort of 2 people who knew each other completely. They made love slowly, tenderly, celebrating 2 decades of marriage and the life they had built together. The next morning they returned to the ranch, where their children greeted them with hugs and excited chatter about everything that had happened while they were gone. Life returned to its normal rhythm, the daily work of the ranch and the care of the family. Owen and Theresa grew old together, watching their children grow up and start families of their own. Daniel took over the running of the ranch, working beside his father until Owen's joints grew too stiff to ride for long hours. Margaret married a neighboring rancher, a good man who treated her with respect and love. Thomas went to college and became a teacher, returning to Taylor to run the school. Catherine married a doctor who moved to town, and she became known for her charitable work among the poor and sick. Owen and Theresa became grandparents and then great-grandparents. They sat on their porch, now elderly but still devoted to one another, watching their legacy unfold around them. The ranch that Owen had built with his own hands, that Theresa had helped to grow and prosper, now supported 3 generations of their family. On a warm spring evening, when Owen was 72 and Theresa was 63, they sat together on that same porch where they had spent so many evenings. Owen's hair was white now, and he walked with a cane. Theresa's hands were gnarled with arthritis, but she still insisted on helping in the kitchen and the garden when she could. "You remember what I asked you that night, years ago," Owen said, taking her hand gently in his. "If you regretted coming here." Theresa smiled, the same smile that had captured his heart so many years before. "I remember. And my answer is the same now as it was then. I regret nothing. You gave me everything, Owen, a life, a family, love. What more could anyone ask for?" "I was the one who received everything," Owen said. "You were my gift, Theresa. The day you arrived wearing those rags, scared and vulnerable, that was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just waiting for you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they loved, surrounded by the life they had built together. Their children and grandchildren moved about the ranch, their voices and laughter floating on the evening air. This was their legacy, not just the land or the cattle, but the family, the love, the commitment to each other that had sustained them through all the challenges and joys of a life well lived. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Owen squeezed Theresa's hand. "I love you," he said, as he had said countless times over the 50 years of their marriage. "I love you too," Theresa replied, as she always did, always and forever. They remained there on the porch, hand in hand, 2 people who had started as strangers brought together by circumstance, and had become one through choice, through commitment, through love. Their story had begun with a woman in rags and a man who saw her beauty despite her circumstances. It had grown into something neither could have imagined, a love that had stood the test of time and had created something lasting and precious. As Owen looked at his wife, at her weathered face that was still beautiful to him, at the life they had built together, he felt profound gratitude. He had taken a chance on a mail-order bride, sight unseen, and had been rewarded beyond his wildest dreams. Theresa had taken an even bigger chance, traveling across the country to marry a stranger, and she had found a home and a love that had sustained her through a lifetime. Their children, now grown with families of their own, often asked them about that first day, about how they had made it work when they had started with nothing but hope and courage. Owen and Theresa would exchange glances, entire conversations passing between them in a look, and then they would tell the story again. How Theresa had arrived wearing rags instead of a gown, how the townspeople had whispered and judged, how Owen had looked past all of that and seen the woman she truly was. "Your father told me I was beautiful," Theresa would say, her eyes soft with memory. "Even though I looked like a beggar, even though I had lost everything, he saw my worth. That was when I knew I had made the right choice in coming here. Your mother's beauty had nothing to do with her clothes," Owen would add. "It shone from within, from her courage and her kindness." That has never changed. The grandchildren loved this story, and they would ask to hear it again and again. It became a family legend, the tale of how their grandparents' love began, and it taught them valuable lessons about looking beyond appearances, about kindness and acceptance, about taking chances on love. One of Owen and Theresa's great pleasures in their later years was watching their children and grandchildren find their own loves, make their own commitments, build their own families. They saw Daniel marry a strong, capable woman who was a true partner to him in running the ranch. They watched Margaret navigate the challenges of frontier life with the same grace and strength that Theresa had shown. They were there when Thomas brought home the woman he loved, a fellow teacher with a passion for educating children. And they celebrated when Catherine found happiness with her doctor, a man who shared her compassion for others. Each generation added to the ranch, to the family legacy, and Owen and Theresa watched it all with pride and joy. The original house had been expanded and renovated over the years, but they insisted on keeping the porch, the place where they had spent so many evenings together, where they had first spoken of love, where they had dreamed together and planned and simply existed in each other's company. As Owen's health began to fail, as his strong body finally surrendered to the inevitable wear of time, Theresa never left his side. She sat with him, held his hand, read to him from the Bible and from the books he loved. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, filling the house with life and noise and love. Owen, propped up in his bed, would watch them all and feel content. He had lived a good life. He had loved and been loved. He had built something that would outlast him. On a quiet morning in late summer, with Theresa dozing in a chair beside his bed, Owen slipped peacefully away. His last thought was of her, of the green-eyed woman who had stepped off a stagecoach wearing rags and had given him everything. He died with a smile on his face, at peace, and surrounded by love. Theresa lived for 5 more years after Owen's death. She remained active and engaged with her family, still offering wisdom and comfort to her children and grandchildren. But those who knew her well could see that a part of her had gone with Owen. She spoke of him often, always with a smile, sharing stories and memories. She spent hours on the porch, sitting in her chair next to the empty one that had been his, as if she could still feel his presence there beside her. On the anniversary of their first meeting, 55 years after that fateful day when she had arrived in Taylor wearing rags, Theresa gathered her family around her. They sat together in the main room of the ranch house, 3 generations listening as she spoke. "I want you all to understand something," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "Life will not always be easy. You will face challenges and hardships. There will be times when you feel like you have lost everything, when you show up to life wearing rags instead of the fine clothes you had planned. But what matters is not what you wear or what you own. What matters is the love you give and receive, the kindness you show, the courage you have to keep going even when things are hard." She looked around at all of them, at the faces of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. "Your grandfather taught me that. When I arrived here, I had nothing. I was dirty and exhausted and ashamed, but he looked at me and saw my worth. He gave me a chance, and together we built this life, this family, this legacy. Never forget that. Never forget to look past the surface, to see the worth in people, to give others a chance just as we were given a chance." There was not a dry eye in the room. Her children came forward, embracing her, thanking her for her wisdom and her love. They promised to remember, to carry forward the lessons she and Owen had taught them. A few weeks later, on a peaceful autumn evening as the leaves were beginning to turn gold and red, Theresa passed away in her sleep. She was found the next morning by Catherine, still sitting in her chair on the porch, a gentle smile on her face. In her lap was an old, faded tintype photograph, one of the few possessions she had salvaged from the robbery so many years ago. It showed a young couple, Theresa's parents, looking hopefully at the camera. She had carried it with her all these years, through all her trials and triumphs. The funeral was the largest Taylor had ever seen. People came from all over the region to pay their respects to Theresa Whitmore, the woman who had become a pillar of the community, known for her kindness, her strength, and her unwavering love for her family. They told stories of her generosity, of times she had helped neighbors in need, of the wisdom she had shared, of the example she had set. Daniel, now in his 50s and the patriarch of the family, spoke at her funeral. "My mother came to this land with nothing," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But she left behind everything. She left behind a family who loves each other, a ranch that has prospered for 3 generations, a legacy of kindness and courage that will continue long after we are all gone. She and my father showed us what love truly means. Not just romance, though they certainly had that, but partnership, commitment, seeing the best in each other and working together to build something meaningful. That is their gift to us, and we will honor it by living according to the principles they taught us." Theresa was buried beside Owen on a hill overlooking the ranch, where they could eternally watch over the land they had loved and the family they had created. Their graves were marked with a simple stone that bore both their names and a single inscription: "Together in life, together in eternity." The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's stewardship and later under his sons. The family remained close, gathering regularly for holidays and celebrations, always mindful of the legacy that Owen and Theresa had left them. The story of how it all began, of the bride who arrived wearing rags and the cowboy who saw her beauty despite her circumstances, was passed down through the generations, never forgotten, always treasured. The porch where Owen and Theresa had spent so many evenings together remained a special place. Family members would sit there in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Texas prairie, and they would feel the presence of their ancestors, the love that had started it all. Children would play in the yard, and their parents would watch from those same chairs, continuing the traditions that had begun more than half a century before. In time, the original house was carefully preserved as a family museum of sorts, while newer, larger houses were built nearby for the growing family. But the old house, with its porch and its memories, remained the heart of the ranch, the place where it all began. Visitors to the ranch, whether family or friends, would always be brought to see it, to hear the story, to understand the foundation upon which everything had been built. The love story of Owen and Theresa became more than just a family tale. It became a reminder that true love looks past surface appearances, that courage and kindness matter more than wealth or status, that two people working together with commitment and care can build something that lasts for generations. It was a story of taking chances, of choosing to see the best in others, of persevering through hardship with grace and strength. Years turned into decades, and decades into a century, but the story remained alive. Great-great-grandchildren who never knew Owen and Theresa personally still knew their names, still heard their story, still felt the impact of the love they had shared. The ranch, now one of the most successful in Texas, stood as a testament to what they had built together, to the legacy of two people who had started with nothing but hope and had created everything. On the 100th anniversary of Owen and Theresa's wedding, the family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. Hundreds of descendants came, some from as far away as California and New York, all drawn back to their roots, to the place where their family story had begun. They stood together on that sacred ground, looking out at the land that Owen had worked and Theresa had loved, and they felt connected across the generations to those two brave souls who had started it all. A great-great-grandson, himself named Owen, stood before the gathered family and read from Theresa's diary, which had been carefully preserved. It was an entry from the day after her wedding, written in her careful, neat hand. "Today I woke up in my new home, married to a man I barely know, and yet I feel hope for the first time in years. Owen is kind and good. He looked at me yesterday when I arrived looking like a beggar, and he told me I was beautiful. I think I might be able to love him. I think perhaps this life might be the beginning of something wonderful." The young Owen looked up from the diary, tears in his eyes. "She was right," he said. "It was the beginning of something wonderful. It was the beginning of all of us, of this family, of this legacy of love and commitment. We owe everything to them, to their courage and their choice to love each other despite the difficult beginning. Let us honor them by living our lives with the same integrity, the same kindness, the same dedication to family that they showed." The family cheered, and then they moved together to the cemetery on the hill. There, at Owen and Theresa's graves, they laid flowers and stood in silent tribute to the couple who had started it all. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple, just as it had done on countless evenings when Owen and Theresa had sat on their porch, hand in hand, watching the day end and dreaming of the future. As the family stood together in the gathering dusk, a gentle breeze swept across the hill, carrying with it the scent of sage and wildflowers. It felt for just a moment as if Owen and Theresa were there with them, blessing them, reminding them of what truly mattered: love, family, commitment, kindness. These were the values that had sustained them through a lifetime, that had built a legacy, that continued to guide and inspire their descendants more than a century after their story had begun. The celebration continued into the evening, with music and dancing and storytelling. The older family members shared their memories, while the younger ones listened raptly, eager to connect with their heritage. And through it all, the spirit of Owen and Theresa seemed to hover over the gathering, their love still present, still powerful, still inspiring after all these years. As the stars came out, brilliant in the vast Texas sky, the family members gradually dispersed, some to the modern houses scattered across the ranch property, others to hotels in town. But a few, the ones who felt the pull of history most strongly, remained. They sat on the old porch of the original house, now more than a century old but carefully maintained, and they looked up at those same stars that Owen and Theresa had watched together all those years ago. "You think they knew?" asked one of the younger family members. "Do you think they had any idea that their love would create all of this?" An elderly woman, one of Theresa's great-granddaughters, smiled. "I think they knew they loved each other," she said. "And I think they knew they were building something important. But I do not think they could have imagined this, all of us here, celebrating them 100 years later. Love does not work that way. You do not love someone because you want to create a legacy. You love them because you cannot help it, because they make your life better, because together you are more than you could ever be apart. The legacy is just what happens when that kind of love is lived fully and honestly." They sat in silence for a while, contemplating her words. Then, one by one, they headed to bed, leaving the porch empty except for the two old chairs that had sat there for as long as anyone could remember. In the darkness, with only the stars for light, it was easy to imagine two figures sitting there, hand in hand, watching over the family and the land they had loved. The story of Owen and Theresa lived on, passed down through the generations, never fading, always inspiring. It was told to children at bedtime, shared with new spouses joining the family, recounted at weddings and anniversaries. It remained a touchstone, a reminder of what love should be, of what commitment means, of the importance of seeing beyond surface appearances to the true worth of a person. And so, though Owen and Theresa had long since passed from this world, their love remained alive in the hearts and lives of those they had left behind. Their story, which had begun with a ragged bride and a cowboy who saw her beauty, had become immortal, a testament to the power of love to transform lives, to build legacies, to create something that lasts long beyond a single lifetime. The ranch continued to thrive, generation after generation carrying on the work that Owen had started and that Theresa had helped to build. The land, once harsh and unforgiving, had been tamed by love and hard work, transformed into a place of beauty and prosperity. But more than that, it had become a symbol of what can be achieved when two people choose to love each other fully, to support each other completely, to build a life together based on mutual respect and devotion. In the end, that was the true legacy of Owen and Theresa Whitmore. Not the land or the cattle or the wealth they had accumulated, though those were significant. Their true legacy was the example they had set, the love they had shared, the family they had created, and the values they had instilled in every generation that came after them. Their story was proof that love, real love, can overcome any obstacle, can turn rags into riches, can transform two strangers into soulmates, can create something beautiful and lasting out of the most unpromising circumstances. And every time someone in the family faced a difficult situation, every time they were tempted to judge by appearances, every time they needed to remember what truly mattered in life, they thought of Owen and Theresa, of the bride who arrived wearing rags and the cowboy who told her she was still beautiful. They remembered that love is a choice, that kindness matters, that seeing the worth in others can change everything. And in remembering, they honored the love that had started it all, the love that continued to inspire and guide them, generation after generation, forever and always.